And now we going the wrong way. Feel it in my spirit, I can sing this song all day. Feel it in my spirit, I can sing this song all day. Look at them and get it right. Feel it, nobody can. Look at them and get it right. Feel it, nobody can. Title, yeah, my thoughts were suicidal. Never had a role model, and I do believe in idols. Struggle for survival, I see both sides of the rifle. Only reason I'm alive, I had nothing better to die for. Black is beautiful, they told me trap is beautiful. I wrote this rap for you to know exactly who I do it for. Yeah, we staying true to form. My soldiers don't wear uniforms. Swimming like a UFO and dropping you, we moving on. I'm hot damn, we done came a long way. If you sleeping on me, you going the wrong way. Feel it in my spirit, I can sing the song all day. Feel it in my spirit, I can sing the song all day. Look at this and get it right. Feel it, nobody can. But we
Hey everyone, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. Thank you for hopping on.
Everybody's on time today.
I tell you, Mr. Watson, these cars might be following, so don't worry about it. So they might be seriously following you, so don't worry about it. And he reaches out the seat of his car and pulls out a brown paper bag with a gun in it. I feel very safe now. With this bomb in my hand, let it tick tock. Bullets flying everywhere, I'm talking big shots. Can't be playing both sides, talking flip flop. Another hashtag, another body drop. Somebody witnesses, somebody eyes watch. You ain't never seen this shit that I seen high. The bullets in his body made a tear drop. It's a wall going on, we against cops. They be watching us like rappers, like hip hop. Woke up in my legacy, I'ma dip out. Middle finger in the air like fuck ya. And if you try to tell me down, man, fuck ya. I'm ready for war. We ain't playing no more. We at the front door. We at the front door. Hey, County.
War is war and war ain't peace. What do you do when you feel defeat? Mama's praying on their knees for some peace, baby. Stand in the street and to make a nigga reap. We gon' do it ourselves. We ain't asking for help. Not depending on police to police us. Let's restore us. Fuck justice, we bring peace. These crooked police, nobody's in trees. He said he can't breathe. We ain't playing no more. We at the front door. We at the front door. No marching lines, no picket signs, don't stop the violence, no denies. We hit the riot, flood the streets, we know police to keep the peace. The war is deep, we keep on rising. Ancestral flow, on payback flow, the blood that flow across the globe, we keep on dying. Unleash the beast is war, not beat the industry. Don't say a beat, they keep on lying. Y'all gon' feel my soul, y'all gon' free my oath. Y'all gon' feel my soul, y'all gon' free my oath. Y'all gon' feel my soul, y'all gon' free my oath. Y'all gon' feel my soul, y'all gon'. Blood on my neck, but I'm innocent. Free all my niggas locked in the pen. Tried in their hand is my silly sin. Can't hold this shit and I unleash the 10. Call up my hitters, they down to ride. Drive on me straight down to 9 to 5. Ready for what it's a part time. End of my sisters got no time. So I probably got him. Police to keep the peace. You recording it?
Okay. Welcome everybody to this, our fifth Sunday school. I saw a bunch of comments in the chat right here. What you all were just listening to are some songs from the Dream Defenders EP, the free P that's dropping very, very soon. So you all will be able to get that very soon from all your streaming platforms. You are listening to Nephi Love, Anikio, who else is on? V. So we have an incredible roster. We believe that artists are the gatekeepers to truth, and they give us so much. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We want to start on time because we have an incredible discussion planned for you all today. And a lot of people showed up on time. So far, over 1,000 of you got on before 1 o'clock. And I'm just going to assume that you all are very timely people, that it has nothing to do with Kay. It has nothing to do with Cherrell, nothing to do with Dr. Angela Davis, okay, nothing to do with Derecka. I'm going to assume it has nothing to do with this movement that is going on across the country, and the fact that abolition has rightfully so reasserted itself as the central demand of a movement that has been fighting for liberation and freedom for many generations. I'm going to assume it's none of those reasons, and that you all are just extremely punctual people. This is Dream Defenders, like I said, fifth one. We do these every 2 weeks. And our goal is to provide a place for the preeminent thinkers, the most inspirational orators, the most dynamic artists, the most dynamic organizers from around the country to have some place to go every 2 weeks to be inspired, to get a call to action, and to learn. We believe that organization is the vehicle to the mass movement that we need. It is not charismatic individuals. It is not people with incredibly large Instagram and Twitter followings. That it is these crucible moments. And yes, these times where we take a little bit, 90 minutes to 2 hours, to pause, to reflect, to think, to consider, and to learn from the genius of our comrades. These are people who are not just thinkers, they are doers. They are not just doers, they are thinkers. They are invested in the praxis that it really takes to eventually see victory in this long, protracted struggle against the most evil empire in the history of man, the United States of America. We are up against incredible, incredible, incredible odds. Our opposition is organized across borders, across waters, across generations. And with that being the case, it behooves us to study, to learn, to be inspired, to be immersed in movement in every single way, and to always, always take time to reflect. The people that we have on this call today are my heroes, my she-ros, my they-ros, my Negroes, okay? These are people that I genuinely look up to. I remember meeting each one. And Kay, I don't know, Kay, Shea Butterfield, have we met? I don't know if we met, but if I'm forgetting where we met, hold me accountable to that. But the people on here, I remember when I first learned of them. I first learned of their work. I was first able to be with them. And every single time that I've had the personal opportunity to be with them, I've been edified. And so I really want to show love to Delaney, to the Dream Defenders leadership, Jonelle Edwards and Rachel Gilmer, to every single organizer in the Dream Defenders, to every organizer, activist, upriser around the country for creating the conditions for this, our fifth Sunday school. And we're so excited to have you all. You know, we always start off with praise and worship. So I'm going to hand it over to Delaney, who knows our praise and worship leader quite well.
Yeah, so happy to be here with y'all. This is going to be incredible. I'm excited, and I know all of you are too. I'm going to pass it over to Deanna. I would do a super thorough intro, but I'm going to let her give a classic HBCU introduction.
Thank you, Delaney. As she said, my name is Deanna. Hello, everyone. I am a rising junior business management student at North Carolina A&T State University, but I am originally from Baltimore, Maryland, 410. I'm super grateful to be a part of this. It's actually my first time being made aware of the platform, so I definitely will be tuning in weeks to come. And again, I'm just grateful, so I'm just going to sing a little song for you guys. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain, to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. And there's an army rising up. Yes, there's an army rising up. There's an army rising up, yeah. To break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. To break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. And I hear the chains falling. Yes, I hear the chains falling. I hear the chains falling. I hear the chains falling. Say there is power in the name of Jesus. Yes, there is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain, to break every chain, break every chain, to break every chain. Thank you so much.
Deanna. Wow. Break every chains. And that's why we're here. That was so timely because we're talking about abolition. We're talking about defunding the police. We are talking about breaking the chains and the shackles off of our people. So thank you so much for being right on time. So I'm going to introduce our next guest who is doing the invocation, Cherrell Brown, legend, North Carolina, Eastern North Carolina legend. We're so thankful to have you. We're so thankful for all the work that you do. Personally, I'm so thankful that you have inspired me. And also, if you want to tell them where you went to school too, you can go ahead and do that because there's 3 of us up here.
All right. Well, I went to the North Carolina A&T State University. What's up, Aggies in the chat? I see you. Thank you, Delaney. I'm so proud of everything you've been doing, baby girl. And so thankful to be here today. Now, y'all, I'm Southern. I'm a call and response girl, but it's kind of hard to get that over Zoom. So feel free to pop in the chat and act like you're talking to me. I hope y'all feeling all right today. Before I get started, I actually want to lift up the names of Dominique Remy Fells and Rhea Milton, 2 Black trans women who were murdered this week. We can't begin to talk about the patriarchal violence of the state without talking about the particular ways patriarchal violence leaves Black trans women particularly vulnerable. We have to say more and we have to do more. In fact, I also want to lift up that there's an action right now happening at Brooklyn Museum for Layleen Blanco, who was an Afro-Latina trans sister who died inside of Rikers Island last year from a seizure. Now, I want to name that any death that happens on the inside is absolutely state-sanctioned murder. So as much as I want y'all to be here with us today, if you are in New York City and you are able, please head over to Brooklyn Museum. It's important for us to show up. Now, I'm supposed to be giving an invocation. I'm a little nervous up here with Dr. Davis and these other brilliant speakers. So let me start with some facts about me. The very first job that I ever wanted was to be a fly girl. Now, some of y'all might be too young, but the fly girl were the dancers on this Black sketch comedy show called In Living Color. I didn't have a rhythm then, and I don't have any rhythm now, but it didn't stop me from every week throwing on some Reeboks and dancing anyhow. And two, I love Star Wars. In fact, me and my granddaddy used to watch it all the time back in my small hometown of Varnberg, North Carolina, where, we were the kind of town that got hyped when a Walmart came in because there was never anything to do. It was a town built largely on farming and lots of factories and plants. In fact, my grandparents worked at the factories for decades before retiring. And that was a story for a lot of Black people in my town because the factories were good, reliable, solid jobs. That wasn't until the late 90s and early 2000s when all those good, reliable, solid jobs packed up and went overseas. And a few years later, we got our very first high-tech, high-security 1,700-bed prison built in 2003. Now, I want to read to y'all a little piece of a press statement I found about the prison. It says, "We are here to celebrate the building of this facility that affirms the department's commitment to keeping the citizens of North Carolina safe. We also are celebrating the 403 jobs the facility means for the community. The 403 positions will generate approximately $12 million in salaries and an estimated annual operating budget of $18 million. Now, this was 2003, so I was in middle school and I didn't have the language for it, but this was my first memory of a prison being packaged as an economic development opportunity, a project of sorts. Sure, it talked about safety, but more than that, it talked about all the jobs it would bring, all the money it would generate for our town. And soon everyone in Laurinburg either knew someone who worked at the prison or they knew someone who was being held captive inside, right? And soon the bail industry began to proliferate all over town. In my small town, which has the second highest unemployment rate in the state, where 39% of the children are below poverty line, it became hard to imagine our livelihoods without this job creator and this life taker, right? We had this institution that was built in part for the express purpose of bringing economic relief while devouring a part of its people. And police had no small role in this. They made sure that this new economic project constantly had capital. That is to say, Black bodies filling the cells. And this particular institution is a male institution. Now, like our father, my brother spent some time on the inside, largely related to crimes about just trying to get by, like lots of folks in our town. And when he get out, like so many other folks with that felony record, it was hard for him to find any kind of employment in a place where unemployment was already so high. Now, I want to pause right here to briefly talk about the history of policing. Now, we talk about policing as this institution founded on catching slaves, and that is true. It's also founded on quelling worker rebellions, right? So like the wealthy people over in Europe and in the Northeast would hire these paramilitary forces to go out and quell workers who were organizing in the streets, taking to the streets, rebelling, much like we've been seeing them do for the last 2 weeks. Now, I'll bring up the history of this very briefly to illustrate that prisons and police have baked into their DNA the purpose of creating a compliant workforce, right? And they've been re-legitimized and reaffirmed over time by widening their scope to address a whole bunch of other social ills like drug addiction, like poverty, like homelessness. In fact, after I wrote this, I'm gonna read to y'all this statement that came out yesterday from the Police Benevolent Association in New York City. Y'all listen to what this says. And this is from Patrick Lynch. He says, Governor Cuomo and our legislative leaders have no business celebrating today. New York State has been failing our communities for decades, failing to provide economic opportunity, failing to educate our youth, failing to care for the vulnerable and mental ill. Police officers spend our days addressing issues caused by these failures. Now we won't even be able to do that. We will be permanently frozen, stripped of all resources, and unable to do the job. We don't want to see our community suffer. Now, y'all, if that's not a good argument to why we need to defund the police and put resources into our communities, I don't know what it is. But therein lies part of the how when we say defund the police and prisons. It's in addressing the system that it claims to mitigate or fix. Now, y'all, we've been talking prison reform since the inception of prisons. So here's an organizing opportunity and call to action. We don't need to ask cops just to warn us before shooting us, right? We don't need cops to go through sensitivity training. We don't need cops cha-cha sliding with us in the streets. Finn in Star Wars didn't ask for Star Troopers to just diversify and hire people that look like him. And why should that be our bar when Minneapolis is showing us that so much more is possible? The solution is actually right there at the margins. What if we had adequate wages? And I'm talking more than 15 an hour, y'all. We need to up that number. What if we had free healthcare and drug rehabilitation that was free and accessible for everyone who wanted it? What if someone just knocked on the window of Rashard Brooks' car to check and see if he was okay before calling the cops? What if we cared for ourselves out of the need for needing police? And what if we funded all these things by defunding the police? Y'all, when I say defund the police, I mean defund. I ain't talking pocket change, I'm talking big bank. I'm talking defund as a means to abolition. And we have to do it. We have to do it for ourselves, we have to do it for our children, and we have to do it for the political prisoners and Black freedom fighters who are still caught up in cages right now. We have to do it for Janine Phillips Africa, and Mumia Abu Jamal, and Jalil Muntaqim, and Machula Shakur, and Joshua Williams. In fact, I'm gonna give y'all your first call to action right now, hold up. Jalil Muntaqim is actually fighting for his life. He has the coronavirus, and he is petitioning for medical parole. There is a petition there for y'all to sign, left in the chat box. Hold on, I put it into the panelist chat box. Let me put it in y'all's chat box. Trying to multitask here. We have to do it, and everyone has a role, right? So in between these uprisings, there's still work to be done. So I need everyone listening to find a political home. By political home, I mean a space, an organization, a coalition that is doing the work you feel called to do. Now, you don't have to be a public speaker or a critical race theorist. You just have to show up, be willing to learn, and be willing to do, because we need you. We need you at your post. Because one day I want to go back to Lombard, North Carolina, back to what was once the site of Scotland County Correctional Facility. And I want to lace up those Reeboks, y'all, and I want to dance through the halls of a reclaimed space, or either in its ashes, whichever one comes first, but it has to come. The death of the system has to come. And not for the sake of death itself, but for the sake of life. We do this work because we know we can take care of each other better than this, right? We do this work because we protect all Black lives, poor folks, queer folks, trans folks. We do this work because we need to liberate the land. We do this work because we love each other more than we hate the state. Now, the quicker I wrap up, the quicker I can get to hearing Dr. Davis speak. So let me say thank you to the Dream Defenders, especially to my baby girl, Delaney. So amazing, baby. To the rest of the panelists here, Derecka, Kay, Bill, y'all are both pallbearers of this decaying system and architects of a better world. And I count myself lucky and privileged to both witness, to be a part of, and to benefit from the work that you all are doing. So thank you. And to my protesters, my rioters, my property redistributors, the curfew breakers, the police horse liberators, the brick throwers, thank you for every righteous way you are showing up right now. It all matters. And to the folks listening in, remember, you have a role to play. Now, I know you might hear politicians acting brand new about what defund means. They say it's too radical, or all of a sudden they don't know definitions, or they're uncomfortable with it. If slavery abolitionists and anti-lynching campaigners and desegregationists waited for polling data to be favorable, or waited for comfortable language for those in power, this would be a different movement, y'all. Our elders and our ancestors have done the seemingly impossible before. So I need y'all to get up every day, dreaming and working and organizing as if the impossible is possible, because it is. And the next time somebody confronts y'all with polling data that suggests we are a long shot from what we want, don't see a stop sign, see an opportunity to organize. Because I'm gonna need all of y'all to defeat the empire. Thank you.
My God. You can take it off mute and clap if you have the capability. Thank you. Thank you. You know, Cherrell always calls me Bishop. Listen, that was incredible. That was incredible. It was incredibly inspiring. I hope all of you all that are listening have a pen and didn't just get wrapped in the amazing oration of Dr. Cherrell Brown. but that you all really took notes. And this is being recorded. This will be available on our Facebook page. This is also being streamed on Facebook if you had someone or know someone that wasn't able to get in. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That was everything that we needed to start us off today. Before we go to Dr. Davis, you know, I'm proud to say when it comes to this abolition thing, Dream Defenders ain't new to this, we true to this. And we've been talking about it for some time. And for those that have been with us for our Sunday schools, you all know that we've been talking about our freedom papers, which is our vision for the future of the state of Florida and really for the country. And one of those is freedom from prison. So we want to play you all this quick video that talks about our freedom from prisons.
Police were never meant to.
Hey, Phil, can you let me know if you can hear
I can hear it, but it's low.
Okay.
Protect and serve me and you. They started as slave catchers, and businessmen started the first organized police department to protect their property and products. Prisons exploded as work camps for newly freed slaves. Police and prisons, since their founding, have always been about safety for the haves and brutality for us. Today, private corporations like Florida's Geo Group make billions of dollars off probation fees, deportation and detention centers, phone calls, commissary, halfway houses, and ankle bracelets. That ain't justice. That's enforcing the line between rich and poor. We can't keep running to find safety where it was never meant to be. By virtue of being born, each of us has the absolute right to people-centered humane justice and violence prevention. An end to this prison and policing system. The end to bail and probation and reinvestment of all that money into social services in our community. This is freedom from prisons.
Okay. So we're proud to have been here, but we're not the first to get here. We stand on the shoulders or we lay gracefully on the shoulders of folks who have come before us, dynamic thinkers, people who were and are visionaries, people who saw and indicted the system and presented a path forward, people who lit the way for our generation, for this moment in time that no one saw possible even 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, for abolition to be the preeminent demand of our movement, right? For a 8 Can't Wait campaign to come out and for it to be summarily demolished by the thinkers and the dynamic people who have a vision of what our lives look like. We know that freedom is not just the opposite of safety. It is the ability to determine what our lives look like, right? And so that is why I'm very excited about having the opportunity to introduce our next speaker, and even more excited about the opportunity for you all to be in dialogue with Dr. Angela Davis. Her reputation precedes her. You all know about her. You all have studied. I hope that you have read her writings, have seen her speak. You know, I did tell Dr. Davis this. I actually have Dr. Davis tattooed. It was before I met Dr. Davis, so it's a little less weird, but it's definitely on my arm here. This is a person who I'm proud to call a mentor, a femtor, somebody that I look to, somebody who always takes the time out of their busy schedule to return my calls and to return the calls of many in the movement that look to her for guidance. So I want you all to take your pens out, open up your ears, open up your hearts for somebody who is a freedom fighter, somebody who deserves all the roses, all the carnations, all the tulips, and whatever other flowers that you love right now while you're in the land of the living and giving life to each and every one of us. So thank you. Welcome to the virtual stage, Dr. Angela Davis.
First of all, it's really wonderful to be here. And thank you, Phil, for the flowers and for inviting me to participate in your Sunday school services. Thank you, Janelle and Rachel and Delaney and the entire leadership of Dream Defenders. And of course, thank you, Cherrell, for the illuminating invocation. And don't let me forget about the music. Well, let me say that we are gathering during the difficult times of a devastating global pandemic and during times of public recognition and mourning the lives of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, George Floyd, of course, and not even 2 days ago in Atlanta, Rayshard Brooks. But we also meet during exciting times, times that are announcing new possibilities of revolutionary transformation. I love Dream Defenders. I love Dream Defenders and have been following and supporting the transformative work that Dream Defenders has been doing since the occupation of the Florida State Capitol building in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin's killing and the failure to convict George Zimmerman. And may I just say a few more things about Dream Defenders and why I love this organization so much. I love Dream Defenders because it is an innovative formation of young people that recognizes the power of art, music, and poetry. Because it has a long history of, long meaning dating at least back to its foundation in 2013, a history of anti-racist activism. And because it is an abolitionist organization, abolish prisons, no more cages, abolish the police. State violence only increases the level of violence from the streets to the bedroom. I love Dream Defenders because Dream Defenders is a feminist organization and acknowledges the inclusiveness of Black feminism and the theories and practices of anti-racist, anti-capitalist feminism that are necessary in order to illuminate the entire frame, not just one aspect. I love Dream Defenders because Dream Defenders is a socialist organization, which is often lacking in our understanding. Racial capitalism is the underlying problem. We have to move towards socialism away from capitalism. And there are a lot of other reasons why I love Dream Defenders, but I'm going to just say one other thing, because Dream Defenders is internationalist, because it has a vision that is global. And thank you especially for your work on Palestine solidarity. So let me begin by saying that abolitionist strategies are anti-racist, anti-capitalist, feminist, and internationalist, and that we have to be consistent in holding all of these dimensions in tension. And of course, since Dream Defenders describes itself as anti-racist, anti-capitalist, feminist, internationalist, Dream Defenders really should be in the forefront of educating the country, especially young people, about the importance of simultaneously thinking about all of these aspects of abolition. So I want to focus this morning on the fact that all the institutions that have been implicated into what is now referred to in the mainstream discourse as systemic racism. We're talking about hospitals and healthcare more broadly, which we have especially witnessed during this time of COVID-19. Schools, universities, juvenile justice facilities, jails, prisons. And of course, all of these institutions have been singled out as sites of reform. They have been pointed to as institutions that will only truly serve our needs if they are reformed in thoroughgoing ways. But every single one of these institutions already has a long history of reform. At first I was going to say reform attempts, but it's not as if past reforms have failed. In many cases, the reforms have been entirely successful, but the institutions have remained structurally racist, misogynist, heterosexist, transphobic. They have all remained tied to corporate capitalism, global capitalism. They have all remained xenophobic. So the question this morning is this: if reforms have failed to have a transformative impact on police or jails or prisons, and indeed on all of the other institutions, does it make sense to simply call for more reforms? What I think is needed in order to answer this question is historical consciousness. Historical consciousness is what we tend to lack in this country. There are white people who still think that just because they or their immediate families were not directly involved in slavery, that they are exonerated, that they bear no responsibility. They have no idea what historical responsibility means. Capitalism, especially capitalist ideology in its current neoliberal form, capitalism benefits from this historical amnesia. The temporality that capitalism urges is a perpetual present. And that is one of the reasons why we find ourselves trying to address problems now that should have been addressed 150 years ago. And that is why we end up calling for reforms over and over and over and over again. If we look at the history of incarceration and the history of policing, one discovers that there have been calls for reforms throughout the histories of these institutions, and many of these reforms have been instituted. Nevertheless, both incarceration and policing have only grown more racist, more repressive, more violent. And having said that, I would argue that abolition is the radical alternative. And remember, I don't know how many times I've tried to make this point, that's the etymological meaning of radical is root. The etymological meaning of radical is root. So abolition allows us to get to the root of the problem. That is why it is the radical alternative. Abolition enables us to escape being trapped by the same framework, the same footprint over and over again. So we don't look at policing and incarceration as discrete institutions that must perpetually remain at the core of our efforts to make human community. We look at abolition as a revolutionary perspective. It asks us to understand and resist not only the single institution, but all of the conditions and forces that enable the continued existence of the institution. So we don't simply add humane to the name of an institution that is so flawed, so structurally racist, so profoundly influenced by heteropatriarchal ideologies that we would have to say, well, we know policing is racist, so let's struggle for a more humane racist police. We know incarceration is inherently class biased and inherently violent, so let's struggle for a more humane class bias. Let's struggle for more humane forms of violence. And of course, that is precisely the argument that has been made about the death penalty. More humane forms of killing people, a more humane wall, a more humane ICE. So how do we avoid being trapped on a treadmill of reform? I want to suggest that we enlarge our analytical framework. We ask questions about relations, connections. We do a feminist analysis. We don't ask the question, what can we do to make an institution that is already demonstrated that it can never fundamentally change, how do we change that institution? But rather we ask, what are the conditions, the contextual conditions and surrounding forces, social forces that need to shift in order to ensure that we don't need to rely on these institutions in order to flourish. Thus, we need schools, not jails. And we certainly don't need schools that try to become jails. I mean, this is an intersectional approach. The part played by feminism, and I have to always insist, we're talking about an anti-racist feminism, we're talking about an anti-capitalist feminism. And this feminist approach is not only to ensure that we keep gender in the frame, and we have to do that as well, but it's to ensure that our analysis is not lazy, that in our analyses we do not shy away from complexity, that we realize that abolition involves both the negative process of overturning and disestablishing, but also the reconstructive process of creating something new. Not just one new thing, but addressing all of the enabling conditions. And this is why we say defund the police. But this is only the negative side. Reconstruction involves imagining and building new ways to address problems that police will never be able to address. And so defund the police also involves that reconstructive, productive dimension. Gender violence services instead of the police, literacy instead of the police, mental and physical health care instead of the police, jobs instead of the police, housing instead of the police. So I said I wanted more of a dialogue and conversation as opposed to a long presentation. So I think I've been speaking probably about 5 minutes or more. So let me conclude by gesturing toward the fact that abolition needs feminism, anti-racist, anti-capitalist feminism. This is one of the dimensions that has fallen away in our in the mainstream conversation about what is happening today. So abolition, feminism. Abolition also has to be placed within an internationalist framework. So let's stop focusing so myopically on the terrible conditions in our own country that we forget about what is happening elsewhere, that we forget about what is happening in Brazil, or that we forget about what's happening in Palestine or France or Australia. And so let me simply conclude by saying abolition, feminism, now. Thank you very much.
Abolition, feminism, now. Nothing less, right? Nothing less. We have worked for this moment. You know, there's a number of music artists and other people of fame who say, you know, I worked for 20 years to be an overnight success, right? And there are a lot of people who are pontificating about the randomness of this moment, but we are a culmination of a series of events, right? And we have not always lost, we have won. And then our opposition has pushed back, and we have won, and our opposition has pushed back, and we have earned this moment in the streets. And so when we say abolition and feminism now, when we say internationalism now, when we say our liberation is bound up with people in Palestine and in Brazil, then we mean it, and we have to mean it, right? And so there are moments, and we've experienced them, Dr. Davis more than others, me more than some, many of you all more than me. We've experienced these moments of catalyzing energy. And it is our responsibility to do everything we can in these moments of catalyzing energy, and to realize that the opposition is working every single day to sew up the tears in its story. Right now, they're doing everything they can to reform us to sleep, right? To choose a leader us to sleep, right? They're doing everything they can. And so it's our duty to preserve this moment. I'm going to shut up. I'm just hyped, and I start talking when I'm hyped. Thank you, Dr. Davis. We want to open it up for questions. And it seems that the best way to do that is to go through the chat, because it may be hard for us to let people actually speak their questions out. I saw a question earlier, Delaney, and I know you're going to handle Q&A, that I like to start it off with, and then we can pull some more from the chat. That'll give you time. Okay. Someone earlier, Dr. Davis, in the chat asked, after abolition, what do we do with murderous police? What do we do with these people who have done us, the people, wrong?
Well, you know, I think we have to be consistent, and we have to acknowledge, first of all, that we make a profound mistake when we assume that individuals are entirely responsible. And so we use this analysis to recognize that if we simply focus on what we call accountability for police, and we focus our demands on more prosecutions and convictions and imprisonment of the police, that draws attention away from the structural reasons why these individuals do what they do. Now, I'm not saying the individuals shouldn't be rendered accountable. Certainly they should. But I think that we can come up with better ideas than simply locking people away to render them accountable. As a matter of fact, jails and prisons are probably a lot easier to endure for a police officer who's engaged in such horrendous acts of violence than a process of beginning to understand the nature of what they've done. A process of education, a process of giving back to the community. You know, and I remember this story about this older woman in South Africa who suffered the death of her husband and her son at the hands of an apartheid police officer. And when she was asked before the Truth and Reconciliation Board what she thought should happen to this white racist apartheid cop, she said, to facing him in the session, she said, "You have taken every single thing that I treasure away from me. And what I want you to do is visit me periodically every 2 weeks ago and allow me to express the love with you that I can no longer express with my husband and with my son." And apparently the cop fainted in the courtroom when he heard that. But you know what I'm saying is that we can come up with more imaginative and more successful ideas than simply sending someone to jail or prison.
Thank you. Delaney?
Yeah, I'm copying and pasting some of these questions so we can get to them. If we don't get to your question, we do apologize, but we're going to get to as many as we can in the time that we have. So the first question that I have up here is, how do we engage and support the non-binary community while acting towards abolition feminism? Does feminism innately rely on the binary?
Well, the kind of feminism I'm referring to does not respect the binary structure of gender. and recognizing that the contribution of non-binary communities is so important, not only in terms of pointing out the concrete issues that we need to address. And of course, many of us already know that, that Black trans women constitute the target of racist violence more consistently than any other community. We're talking about state violence, we're talking about individual violence, stranger violence, intimate violence. So if we want to develop an intersectional perspective, the trans community is showing us the way. And we can't only point to, and we need to point to cases such as the murder of Tony McDade, for example. But we have to go beyond that and recognize that we support the trans community precisely because this community has taught us how to challenge that which is totally accepted as normal. And I don't think we would be where we are today, encouraging ever larger numbers of people to think within an abolitionist frame, had not the trans community taught us that it is possible to effectively challenge that which is considered the very foundation of our sense of normalcy. So if it is possible to challenge the gender binary, then we can certainly effectively resist prisons and jails and police.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question, I feel a lot of people have asked this one. With abolition in mind, what would justice look like for people like Breonna Taylor today if convicting the police is not the way to go?
Well, I think that abolition helps us conceptualize new forms of justice. We tend to think about justice as retributive justice. We tend to think about justice as simply doing to the person who has committed a harmful act, doing to them the same thing that they have themselves done. And that impulse towards vengeance, which is the impulse of the state, is an impulse that we have also internalized. And we begin to think that we will only feel better if we can make the person who has hurt us hurt as much or more than we do. And that, of course, keeps us in this infinite circle that never really accomplishes anything. So that restorative justice or reform or transformative justice, I like the term transformative justice. Now, what does it mean to imagine a justice that will move us in the direction of creating a more just human community, of creating relations that will allow us to flourish, as opposed to being caught up in a cycle of revenge and retribution. And I don't think many of us recognize that we have internalized these emotions. We have internalized this ideology into our own emotional makeup, so that when someone hurts us, we don't ask, what can we do in order to make this relationship better? We ask, how can we hurt them? I mean, that is what police are all about. That is what jails and prisons are all about. And I think we can come up with some more beautiful, more imaginative ways of creating community.
Absolutely. I want to go ahead and invite all the other guests to answer questions as well. There's so many, so we just want to make sure that all the brilliance on the call gets to be shared. So one question, how does this radical mindset fit into our current democracy? How do we feel confident in who we are voting for when we know they don't share our radicalization?
So who's that for?
Anyone who wants to take it.
I mean, we should just acknowledge that people are gonna let you go first today.
Okay, all right. I mean,
that's what's gonna happen.
You know, I'm on this call to learn as well. I'm on this call not only to teach, but primarily to learn. But I will say that I know exactly what that person means. I do not want to have to vote for someone who was responsible for, in part, for one of the worst legal expressions of mass incarceration, and who was responsible for placing the Violence Against Women Act within the context of the Crime Act, which means that the only way in their conception one can begin to address gender violence is through more police. But anyway, I don't want to vote for him. But I do want to vote for myself. I do want to vote for us. I do want to vote in such a way that is going to expand the space that we have to continue to do the work of radical transformation. And I know that that the other person, the occupant of the current occupant of the White House, I refuse to pronounce his name publicly because that gives him more power. So I know that that person, we all know that that person is shrinking the space constantly. And so therefore, I think we have to encourage people to vote for an expanded space. And that's what this election is about. Both parties are tied to corporate capitalism. And they aren't profound, and the Democratic Party is not really an alternative. I mean, it's better, is much better, I think, especially at this point, because at least they're not running around representing themselves as white supremacists. But they don't understand the depth of racism, and they think that don't let me get into a critique of the Democratic Party, but let me say that we all have to go out and convince people that we need to vote for ourselves this time. That is what we will be doing.
Other folks?
This is a question I always struggle with because my feelings and beliefs around the political system and our work in it is ever changing. But here's what I will say. It's because of the organizers who refused to go home, the activists who took to the streets, both in the Ferguson uprising, both before then and after. They're the reasons why any of these candidates have anything that looks like a progressive policy in their platforms. So shout out to the organizers and the activists who are keeping feet to fire. It is pushing people to the left. And that is what I'll say about the electoral organizing.
All right, I'm assume Derecka and Kay. Well, okay. Yeah, do you want to speak on that question, or we can ask another one?
I'll speak on that question. I'll just say that I don't really have strong opinions on voting personally, like voting or not voting, just because my identity as an organizer is not rooted in that one area or arena. So I think that a better question people need to have is why, if voting is the only thing that they're doing to push through to create the world they want to see, I think that they need to question why that is. And then there will be less pressure around their decision whether or not they're going to vote.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna ask, so someone is asking a question around Black unity and Black economics, and if that's an answer or a potential solution to the issues that we're facing right now. And specifically, this person asked, what do you believe is necessary to effectively bring the Black community back to bartering and push Black unity in economics?
Should I start off? You know, I know that there are calls for Black unity, and I would prefer to say Black radical unity. I would prefer, some other adjective there, because there are Black people I definitely do not want to unify with. I don't want to unify with those who say, well, yeah, it's okay to keep things as they are, as long as we respect those who have obviously moved forward. As long as we respect the capitalists, the Black capitalists, and the Black, elite. But let me say this: during periods of crisis, we all have a tendency to remain within our comfort zone. We have their default positions. And for Black people, the default position is a kind of nationalism that has become obsolete. We think that our role should be to unite the Black community. But I think our role should be to participate in the community in such a way as to encourage people to ask the questions that will radicalize them, that will move forward. And we also can't confine this to the Black community. One of the reasons there is so much militarization of police forces today, has to do with countries like Israel. It has to do with the rise of Islamophobia. And we have to recognize that if we're ever going to get rid of racism directed against the Black community, we have to get rid of racism directed against indigenous communities and Latinx communities and Muslim communities. We have to broaden our frame. I mean, that's what I was trying to talk about when I said that we need to broaden our analytical frame, and let's not slip back into what are our comfort zones and the historical demands for racial justice. And let me just say one thing: usually unite the Black community means unite Black men and bring Black women, or maybe even trans people, in to support Black men. It's a kind of a masculinist framework as well.
Yeah, I can speak to this. I can speak to this really quickly. Hi, everyone. I am just so grateful to be a part of this conversation, and I thought about that too, Dr. Davis. What do we mean by Black? Like, who is the Black community? I know there's a really popular slogan, which is, I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. And in my Twitter bio, I put, I'm rooting for everybody that's resisting oppression, because it's a lot of Black people participating in, the level of oppression that we see today. I have been personally very conflicted, because it's hard, especially in the wake of police killing, in the wake of police violence, because we get the police violence starter kit. We get the same Black people preaching the eulogies. We get the same Black lawyers with representation, and we get the same mayors putting up the same Black families asking for calls for peace. Please, the family wants this. The family wants this. We should support the family. We should listen to the family. We should defer to the family. And then that puts other Black people who are resisting in a very complicated situation. Because then to resist, to continue to go into the streets, to continue to organize, to continue to demand, not peacefully, is to then be in conflict with this Black mother or this Black father who have just lost their loved one. So what does it mean to be in unity? What does it mean to be in support of? And so what usually those calls are efforts to suppress resistance, to suppress rebellion. And we can't allow that to happen. So what does it mean for you to say, you know, we hear this family, we acknowledge this family, we understand right now they don't believe what's happening to the streets, you know, represents what their loved one would have wanted. We start to politicize it, right? It is what the loved one would have wanted. If you ask some people early after Ferguson, they would say, I'm accountable to Michael Brown, I'm accountable to the people who've died. But what does it mean to be accountable to each other? Because one fallen, someone who's been murdered in the street, someone's been killed, people are resisting, not just because of that one person, right? It's because we're all vulnerable. We all are vulnerable. This movement belongs to all of us. So when I was a lawyer in Ferguson, the DOJ would do the same thing that we're doing with Black, except they would do it for community. They would say that, you know, the community wants policing. They want community policing. The community wants, you know, this process, this consent decree to work. This community wants this. And then I would ask, which community? Because there's a lot of community members right now saying F12. Are they not the community? There are a lot of community members saying abolish the police. Are they not community? So community and Blackness, it usually becomes metonyms or other stand-in words for what we really mean, and what we really intend to do, or what they intend to do, is to quell dissent and repression. And we cannot let that get in the way.
Derecka, did you just say metonyms? You know what, and I'm not going to distill the brilliance of what you just said into one word, but can you break down metonyms for people? Can you do that for people?
I can try. So usually it's just another way to explain a word that's a stand-in for another word. So when you say DC, you're talking about the capital, right? That if you say, you know, suits, and there's like metonyms, syndicates, all these, all I'm trying to say is that it's just a word that we're using to actually mean a bigger picture, a bigger word. It's when you're talking about suits, you're talking about professionals. When my people in the streets say F the laws, they're talking about the police, right? It's all of these things, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Derecka. That was, I think a lot of people get caught up in Black unity, especially in moments like this. So thank you so much for breaking that down. So I think one of the most common questions that folks are asked, or that folks are asking right now, that I think everyone has touched on, but maybe there needs to be just a little bit more clarity, is once the police are gone, they're just gone completely. If we reach that goal, which I think is possible, who or what is the professional that will be dispatched to violent crime? Who is going out there? Is it me? Is it y'all? Is it our parents? Who is it?
Well, you know, it's so interesting that when we think about abolishing the police or abolishing prisons, the first thing that comes to our mind is the most extreme example. You know, when we say abolish prisons, people say, well, then what's going to happen with the murderers and the rapists? What are we going to do with them? When we say abolish the police, the assumption is that there won't be anybody to address emergency issues. You know, I've lived in the same neighborhood in Oakland for a long time. One of my neighbors used to be a Black fire person. He did a lot of the organizing within the fire department against racism. So he told me, he said, you know, if you ever have a problem, if someone is breaking into your house, do not call the police. Call the fire department. Say, I smell smoke, and they'll be there. So, you know, the point that I want to make is that the police and prisons are expected to address a whole range of issues for which they are not equipped to deal. And, so someone is having a serious mental breakdown. And the only thing people are encouraged to do in this moment is to call the police. And oftentimes that person ends up getting killed because the police have no idea how to deal with someone in crisis. So, we have to imagine a whole range of alternatives. We have to also see ourselves as doing work that police are expected to do. A process of de-skilling has happened. Now, many of the issues that the police are now expected to deal with used to be dealt with within communities. But now we do not even think that we're capable of intervening in a situation. This wonderful group, Sister to Sister, used to do educationals on the street where they would have a man engage in a misogynist attack, verbally or whatever, on a woman. And if no one attempted to intervene, the groups in the group in their educational process, they would start a school, a class right there on the spot, on the street, asking people, why didn't they help? Why didn't they intervene? So I think that that we're gonna have to think about a whole range of strategies to address that, including strategies to address people who commit horrendous acts of violence. But then we'll also be encouraged to try to understand why people do that. What are the cycles of violence that are the cause for gender violence happening generation after generation after generation? Someone grows up in an environment which is saturated with gender violence, then of course that is normal for them. So how do we break those cycles? And I think to try to boil it down to the most extreme example is not really helpful. And it acts as a way to dissuade us from moving in that more imaginative, more just direction.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Thank you, Derecka, K, Cherrell. Thank you all for your genius. Please do not go anywhere. I don't see the numbers decreasing at all. We have still some amazing leaders, but I want to give a moment to just thank you, Dr. Davis. This has been a personally really, really, really bad emotional time for me personally. But to take stock of my life and take stock of the life of Dream Defenders and know that somebody who is a lion, someone who I look up to, someone who at one point I romanticized, and once I got to know you, you just became that much more of a, frankly, a godlike figure in my life, to know that you see the value in the work that we do, that you see the value in what is being done, really does bring me out of darker times. And so I just want to thank you personally, and thank you on behalf of everybody on the call for giving so generously of your time, because you don't have to, but I know that you do, because you're committed to this struggle. So thank you so much. So I hope that you all got as much as I did from that. And I fancy myself a learner and a thinker, and there was so much about that I didn't know. So I hope all of you all got what you needed, and continue to read, continue to study the works of Dr. Davis and other abolitionist thinkers, feminist thinkers, and continue to edify yourself and learn you some words, some metonyms. I don't know how many of you all see me, but I think some people see me as a courageous person. But to be honest, there are times where I can't find the words, or I don't have the courage to say what needs to be said. And in the last 2 or 3 years, Derecka Purnell has been the person who already has said them. It's already in The Guardian. It's already on Twitter. It's already there. And Derecka has been there as an unrelenting, unequivocal voice in the darkness many times. When people don't want to say what needs to be said, Derecka is doing it. I met Derecka years ago when you invited me to Harvard, and you know, we had a time. You know, that's for other. You know, we got into it with the
Still
state.
couldn't get inside the club, and I had to get him inside the club. That's why.
And it was a little battle. It was a battle. Bouncers do not like me, but I want to say, I want to thank you. In fact, most recently, a most recent example is in this moment when we have gotten the entire country talking about abolition, talking about defunding the police, and a group seeking to steal the energy of this moment, seeking to curtail it and come up with a set of reforms that could potentially possibly decrease your chances of maybe getting murdered by the police by 72%, give or take a few percentage points, wanted to come in and sweep up all the energy. And that couldn't happen. And that didn't happen because of the work of our next two presenters. And so I'm really honored to bring to the stage, or the circle, a thinker, an incredible legal mind, an organizer, an activist, a mother, and a great, great, great person beyond all of that, Derecka Purnell.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Wow. I feel like I'm about to get married. It was so affirming. I don't even know. I don't even know what to do. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so Phil, you know, invited me to be a part of this conversation. I'm the only member of Dream Defenders who doesn't live in Florida. Like, I'm the only member of Access St. Louis who doesn't live in St. Louis. And so it feels good to, like, you know, be in conversation with my people. Also met Cherrell at, like, the Quick Trip in Ferguson, you know, before, you know, everyone was like, wow, like, I remember. So just thank you so much for the invitation. And you know, you asked me to give a testimony. You know, when I was going to church in St. Louis and in Kansas City, where I went to college, the testimony was for people who, you know, want to share an experience or a hardship that we're going to, and how God or Jesus, like, intervened to say, like, you know, he saved me, God saved me. You know, that was the testimony. And so I was thinking about what to say. And I think it's really important that I try to speak to some of the people who are fence sitters, you know, the people who are afraid when they hear abolition, because I was certainly afraid. You know, so I'm from St. Louis. I grew up at the intersection of downtown and South St. Louis. And by the time Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown in Ferguson, I was on my way to law school. I actually came back to St. Louis to pick up my furniture that was on a West Florissant down the street from where he was killed. And so I literally was, like, at home during this time. Like, I'm thinking I'm about to go become, like, this lawyer, this education lawyer, this superintendent of a school district. And, you know, this anti-policing movement happened. And I just remember, like, wow, it felt like all the killings that were going on in the country, from, you know, Trayvon Martin to Jordan Davis, it felt like each killing was sort of getting closer and closer to me. And by the time Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown, it literally was in my backyard. Like, I used to catch a bus past that Quick Trip every day to go to Sodan High School on the west side of St. Louis, right? So it was just such a transformative moment for me, personally and politically. And when I was in Ferguson, we used to, and I tell the story all the time because it like shows some of my transition. You know, we used to do indict, convict, send those killer cops to jail. The whole damn system is guilty as hell, right? And so I remember chanting, I remember believing it, I remember demanding arrests, I remember demanding the indictments, the convictions. You know, by the time the non-indictment happened, I was in my first year of law school. I was on the floor watching the city, just another uprising. This is like November around Thanksgiving. And I just remember being so defeated, feeling so defeated that Darren Wilson wasn't going to go to jail or prison for killing Michael Brown. And now I think about actually a lot of my peers, it may seem like we all have the politics, we've been abolitionists our whole lives, but, you know, Dream Defenders became an abolitionist organization. BYP 100 became an abolitionist organization, right? We didn't wake up abolitionists. It was through study and through struggle that forged our politics. And especially someone like me, when I heard police abolition, I was like, they don't know the Negroes in my hood, right? Because they don't know like the type of violence. I assumed that it was white. I assumed it was utopic. I didn't understand the politics of it. So when I heard like abolish the police, I was just so overwhelmed with the potential for what that was going to mean. Until Darren Wilson did not go to jail. And I was much fortunate to be around people who had politics that were much more developed than mine, to be around people who had been studying and struggling around the set of politics, for years. And just as someone who saw, especially, poor Black women who are vulnerable to our neighbors, to our lovers, to our parents, to our friends. And then the police, as I started learning about police killings of Black women, police sexual assault of Black women, I started thinking, what is it that I really, really wanted to fight for? Like, what is it? What is the type of world that I wanted to be in? And so, again, not sexy, very sitting down, reading Our Prisons Obsolete, reading Our Enemies in Blue, reading Black Marxism, reading Freedom Dreams by Robin Kelly, reading all these texts of people who have been doing this work. And I was just like, so I'm not the first person who asks, what about the murderers? I'm not the first person who asks, what about the rapists? People have asked these questions before. People have known these questions before. This isn't new. I'm not asking or presenting a new idea. And I think the most powerful thing that I learned from that period of like deep study and struggle in my life is most of the people who've come to abolitionists come through their own survival. Because they're survivors. So when you ask us, you don't care about safety, you don't care about victims, it's precisely because of our experiences of victims and as survivors that we come to the politics, because we know that it's not going to get us free. The current situation is not going to get us free. Even in this particular moment, there's an uprising because George Floyd died. It hurts to say that, but there's an uprising, there's resistance because he died. And I don't think I want to be a part of the world where we're fighting for him to live and get arrested. Because what if the police would have had his knee on his back for 7.5 minutes instead of 8.5 minutes? Is that justice? Is that what we're fighting for? For him to be near death? For him to have almost died, for him to then just be picking up and then taken in the back of a police car to be prosecuted for allegedly a counterfeit $20 bill? Is that the world we're fighting for? Because that's the difference between reform and abolition. We're not fighting for safer violence. That's not the world we're fighting for. We're not fighting for near-death experiences for our people. That's not the world we're fighting for. We're not fighting for officers just to get convicted. Because one big pushback that I get from people, and again, I've said this too, I believe part of this too. What about most of the officers who just do the right thing? Like listen guys, most officers, most police, they just do the right thing. We have these bad apples, this culture push them in a warrior mindset, but most police officers just do the right thing. Well, we have to ask what the right thing is, right? Most police officers arrest millions of poor people, 10 million people every year, and the bulk of the people who are arrested and rearrested, they have incomes of less than $10,000 a year. So if the good apples are doing that, and that's the right thing, shouldn't we start asking, well, why is that the right thing? Why are we using police to manage inequality in this country? Is that the right thing that good police do? The number one complaint against police officers is excessive force. The number 2 complaint is sexual assault and misconduct. So if we want to be safe from the murderers and rapists, we should ask which ones. Because I want to be safe from police too, and that's also what they do. So it just, like, I understand. Even my mom, after the Ferguson uprising happened, my mom had a sign in her yard. And there's this organization that passed them out to all the Black poor communities in St. Louis. And it said, we must stop killing each other. We must stop killing each other. So when people ask, what about the killers? They're thinking, what about Black on Black crime? They think about abolition as all the cops go home today, all the prisons close today. And one thing I can say, rest assured, that white supremacy and capitalism are not going to let everything close overnight. So yeah, like that's not even going to happen overnight. But even trying to work out this politics with my mom and people, my family around, okay, like what's going to happen? How will we feel safe? You know, and I asked my mom, we walked through that, you know, because everyone doesn't kill for the same reason. Everyone doesn't commit sexual assault for the same reason. And as Dr. Davis explained earlier, we have to let go of the assumption that individuals are even responsible for the harm that they create, right? We come out of institutions, we come out of families and churches and schools where all of the violence is so pervasive and it socializes us, right? You know, I told this story a couple of days ago of my 6-year-old. I always talk about my 6-year-old because he's the youngest abolitionist I know, right? Juice, I mean, when his younger brother is watching Paw Patrol, he comes and tells me because he's just like, you know, I know they puppies, but we don't do Paw Patrol in this house. So he goes and tells on Garvey, right? So, you know, Cherrell brought the 2 Black trans women who were killed into this space. Raya and Dominique. I think Raya was in Ohio and Dominique was in Georgia. Was Dominique in Georgia? 2 black trans women were killed. And it's just how in the middle of an abolitionist movement, we're still seeing the type of violence that we're seeing against people who are most vulnerable. And how do we protect them? So we know that we can't protect them now with police, right? So my son, he has this kid in his class who has been like annoying him and me for 3 years, right? And so Juice goes into class one day. This little kid says, he's pointing to all the kids in the class, to all the boys, and he goes, "You're a girl, you're a girl, you're a girl, you're a girl." And all the boys are like, "Ew, oh my God, oh, I'm not a girl." Like their little 6-year-old bodies are getting so angry because the idea of them being called a girl is just like it just messes up everything that they've been socialized to think about themselves. So this kid gets to Juice and says, you know, "You're a girl." And Juice says, "That's okay. Anybody can be a girl." And I was like, yes, like that's it. Anybody can be a girl because that's how we resist transphobia. And that's what makes trans Black women safe, resisting transphobia. And that starts when our kids are 5 and 6 and 7 years old. So by the time they're 27, 28, 30-year-old Black cishet men, they don't feel intimidated. They don't know what to do with their toxic masculinity. They don't know what to do with their patriarchy. They don't have to undo 30 years of thinking that these are boys and these are girls and gender is a binary. It starts with that transformative work. So do we want punishment or do we want safety and liberation? You know, do we want police to go to prison for killing George Floyd? Or are we fighting for a world where he's near death and goes to jail? Are we stopping the need or the desire of people, or desire is not even the best word? Are we creating a different kind of world where people are not being arrested over counterfeit $20 bills? Because that's the problem. That's the problem. And so what has helped me navigate the politics of abolition, and I consider myself a baby abolitionist, and when people are just like, "Oh my God, like abolition is expert thinking," I'm just like, I've been an abolitionist maybe like 3 years tops, and people have been like doing this work for decades. It comes from a longer tradition, you know, going all the way back to people who were running and figure out how to try to get free. I'm very much a baby abolitionist and always learning and struggling and sharpening my politics, right? So what helps me think through abolition is not just, you know, it's an alternative, right, to what we have now. I try to think about it as an invitation, right? If we start thinking about abolition as an invitation, it's not just asking the 6 people on this panel, what do we do to this? It's saying, hey, like, that's not up to me. I don't have one just answer for you. It's an invitation for us to think about the politics and struggle through it together. And that's much more exciting. That's much more, it's just like, we get to decide what that is. We get to decide what to do when people commit harm. We decide to do when people hurt each other and at least have violence or at least to death. And it doesn't mean that people haven't tried before. It means that we should ask, what have people been doing? Right? What have people been doing around sexual assault and around violence that leads to death? right? It's how can we learn that history? How can we build upon that history? And how can we create together? Where is our imagination and where is our will? So Cherrell, early in her introduction, she said something that I was just like, yes, I said something very similar the other day around people not having all the answers. You know, when the institution of slavery, and Dr. Davis, I can't remember if this is in Our Prisons Obsolete or Abolition Democracy, where you say that why we use the analogy to abolition and why, you know, the people who are enslaved and people who are incarcerated, they share a lot of overlap in terms of like demographics and oppression. But I think what I've been deeply attracted to with abolition is, you know, looking to the abolitionist struggle of slavery, right? It's like, wow, you know, they didn't wait until everybody was on board with abolition, right? They didn't wait. Even the people who were abolitionists still had to get their politics right. Yeah. And some of them thought, okay, people about to be free, all right, we're done, right? There was no serious, for a lot of them, no serious engagement with capitalism, right? It was just like, what's the Negro question? And everybody who was against slavery wasn't for Negro liberation. So then it's like, what? Who are we trying to be in this country? And so what's so profound about the abolitionists then is that they knew that it was riskier to stay on plantations than what it would be like to pursue freedom. And they just started running. They started running, and the society had to change. So as an invitation, as an abolitionist invitation, we just need you to start running. That's what we need you to do. We need you to start running, and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. So that's my testimony. It's how I became an abolitionist: reading, struggling, studying, and running, figuring it out. Listen to people, you know, on this, in these boxes and in the chat. So thank you so much, and yeah, just thank you.
Just start running. That's amazing. I can't wait to rewatch this. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Derecka. Wow, I hope you look at the chat, and I really hope it makes you feel warm. Everyone is saying that they love you so much. That was amazing and so powerful. So next we are going to have our benediction by Agbebyi, and they are an incredible abolitionist, someone that I've looked up to for a very, very long time. Some of you may know them as Shea Butter Femme on Twitter. And if you don't know them as Shea Butter Femme on Twitter, you should go ahead and follow them ASAP. But we're so excited to have you and have you wrap up our show today.
Thank you so much. I've also looked up to you, so this is really exciting. Yeah, before I start the benediction, I just want to thank all the panelists today and Dream Defenders. I can't believe I'm sitting here doing a benediction, so I'm just really grateful. So I'm only 25, so I know that abolition is not new. Like Derecka was saying, I'm relatively new to this. And I know that it wasn't just sitting around waiting for me to engage with it. It was being molded and theorized about in living rooms, journals, universities, prison cells, and also on plantations. And so when I first started organizing, my work wasn't rooted in abolition. The first campaigns that I was working on were asking for cops to be sent to jail. And whenever I heard about abolition, I had the same questions that everyone else had, like, what about the murderers? Or like, what about the rapists? This isn't realistic. Then I moved to Michigan and I experienced immense harm. And that's when I really just wanted to realize or figure out why people harm people and why we have a system in place that perpetuates harm instead of actually stopping it. And that's when I started doing the reading. So I read Our Prisons Obsolete. I read anything I could get my hands on. I followed Miriam Kaba. I realized that I was standing on the shoulders of giants, or laying gently, as Phil just said, on their shoulders. So I think a question that I'm dealing with right now is how do we honor the legacies of everyone who came before us, but also use this current moment and harness our creativity and momentum to build something new. I recognize that this is a moment of intense upheaval. It's a moment when so many people are realizing that they're worthy of demanding a world without police. In just 1 month, so much pain has occurred. George Floyd was brutally murdered. Breonna Taylor's death made its way to the mainstream media. Tony McDade was murdered. Footage emerged showing that the prison system, or Rikers, killed Layleen Polanco the same week that her killers were found not responsible. Jamel Floyd was killed in a prison in Brooklyn, and then Rashard Brooks was killed in Atlanta, and the city took to the streets last night. I don't share all of those stories in vain. I recognize them as being part of a long lineage of Black people who have been criminalized and killed by the state. And then I'm also realizing that as Black people are dealing with their righteous anger and trauma while being forced to consume more images of people dying, abolitionists are also dealing with how to make sense of this moment. As I'm moving into this next phase of my organizing, I'm so grateful for all that abolition has given me. To be an abolitionist is to complicate. It's to sit with that tightness in your chest or that knot in your gut. It is not to run like I did in the past. It is to feel all the uncomfortable feelings, and it is to know that justice will not come when killer cops are arrested or charged. As we hear calls to defund the police, along with screams to charge the cops, it is our duty as people who believe in freedom to make sense of the noise. This moment requires us to be who we say we are, to strengthen our stance against the imprisonment of anyone, and instead work to shrink the scope of the prison industrial complex as a whole. To be an abolitionist is to know the difference between accountability and punishment. It is to know that what happens in prisons is only punishment, and that punishment is not reserved for seemingly bad people. It is reserved for people just like us, and if we do not eradicate the entire complex, it is a place where we or our loved ones can end up. As many have pointed out, we have all been harmed and we have all caused harm. The existence of one fact does not rule out the existence of another. The prison system attempts to redefine who can be human. We know that we are human, and abolition requires me to ask, how can the human in me see and honor the human in you? At this time, we are seeing a rise in the popularity of dangerous reforms. We are told that Black life is sacred only 72% of the time. We are told that it will be okay as long as chokeholds are banned. We are pushed to trust those in power just because they look like us. We are continuously seeing asks for more training and more diversity, which will only give the PIC more money. We are being told this time is when reforms will really work, while also being shot down for being unrealistic. People are making money off of our suffering. Celebrities are being pulled out into the public to defend the state. Suddenly defund doesn't mean actually defund, and abolish just means start over. Up is down and down is up, and abolitionist organizers must learn the new rules. We must educate ourselves when we can barely keep up. Abolition teaches us to fight for more so that we may get more. It teaches us to not invest in the same old just because that is how it's always been done. Abolition gives us the framework we need to redefine safety. We learn that it does not come in the barrel of a cop's gun, but in the warmth of our chosen family's hugs. We learn interdependence from our disabled comrades, and mutual aid from our queer comrades, and love from our Black comrades. We learn about the intersections and realize those are all the same comrades. Abolition pushes us to identify who our people are. It forces us to question why some people do not have people. It pushes us to open up and let people in so we no longer feel alone. Abolition teaches us that a neighbor is not just a neighbor, and a phone call is not just a phone call. These are our lifelines. We reach to our loved ones on the inside to determine strategy and goals. We give to our loved ones on the inside to find intimacy and solidarity. We heal in the streets as we chant against the police. We maintain discipline in our room as we run our fingers over book pages. We are building new worlds day by day, and that fuels our passion to tear the old structures down. Since moving to New York, I've been given the opportunity to organize with and learn from and form a friendship with Miriam Kaba. I found a political home in the group she co-founded called Survived and Punished. Her work has informed the analysis of me and so many others, including people on this call. Last week, I told Miriam that I would never disagree with her anymore after she gave me advice on a fundraiser that I didn't listen to, and it just ended up being a mess. But I do have to disagree with her one last time. In regards to abolition, Miriam frequently tells other people that she's not an evangelist. Well, Miriam, I am. I'm an evangelist for the Church of Abolition. I am not a religious expert, but I have been to church, so I have an idea of what it entails. In this abolitionist church, all are welcome. There are no pastors. We create the scripture together. No one is left behind. The last become the first. And the donation basket is for all of us to reach our hands into. There is always overflow parking. There is food after each service, and there's always space for difficult conversations. This is our church. We are building it brick by brick, day by day, and I hope all who are watching will consider converting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Does anybody else want to give a vocal affirmation?
The church of the doors are now open.
Come on.
Is there one? Is there one?
Is there one? Listen, I think in the church they would say, now it's time to pass the plate, and we ask,
I'm ready to pay tithes.
Come on, press down, shaking together, and running over. Come on. I don't have much of the words to say, but just thank you all. Thank you all. Abolition provides possibility in a world where we're taught that punishment is inevitable. You know, something came to me. It is not a way that I live. It's a way that I hope to live. So there's some radical honesty there, and people that know me may roll their eyes now, but a part of abolition is a part of it is not punishing yourself and being so hard on yourself and giving yourself room to breathe and room to correct and room to be better and room to imagine a new way for you to be in the world. And I think in some ways it begins there. And so I want to appreciate every single one of you all for being an evangelist, for going into the highways and the byways and compelling the people to come to this Church of Abolition, because really, as I said, it is our only hope in a world where we are taught that punishment and capital are inevitable, that supremacy and dominance is inevitable, that power as a force used against us is inevitable, that bankers are from on high, and that God destined and deigned that we should live in this way. Abolition is our way forward. It is a liberatory message, and the message grabs a hold of every ear it gets whispered in. And so I want to thank you all so much for doing this. We're not done yet, because, you know, at the end of church, you have an altar call, and we do something called the altar call to action. The altar call to action. We don't want to leave you all from getting all this inspiration, all this education, without giving you all something to do. And you all have heard a lot, but the next person that I want to bring up is the national organizer. Am I correct? National organizing, national coordinator? Jesus. Is the dynamic co-leader of the formation that is providing the scaffolding, that is providing the support, that is in many ways both getting out of the way and getting right in the middle of what is happening in these uprisings around the country and around the world. This is an organizer who I respect greatly, who has allowed me actually to find or re-find a home within the movement for Black Lives, the larger ecosystem that we have. Somebody who is an amazing person, a lover of our people, who is going to give you all your altar call to action. I want you all to please give it up for Carissa Lewis.
Thank you. Thank y'all for having me. Really, really excited to be here. And just grateful to sit at the feet of all of the brilliance that was just inside of this conversation. Like, my God, it definitely felt like a gift on this Sunday. And shout out to Phil, who is my comrade, beloved, like friend, love you. So the Movement for Black Lives, really quickly, is an ecosystem and political home for Black-led and centered organizations across the country. Dream Defenders is a member of the Movement for Black Lives. And like many folks on this call, we are holding both grief and determination. as we work to shift the conditions for Black people in this country. And it's happening in many ways all over the country, and we're deeply inspired and committed to that process. What we see in this moment is a culmination of multiple storms converging. COVID-19, police violence, racial capitalism in crisis, intensified white supremacy coming from the inhabitant of the White House. And so in response, we know that folks are in the streets, and we believe that we're at a precipice as a nation. And we will either allow for more of the same reforms that have left our communities struggling for breath, both literally and figuratively, or we will chart a new path forward that demands the dignity, safety, and brilliance of our people to both be respected and centered. And so we are inviting you all to take action over the Juneteenth weekend. We are naming the action 619. 619 for Juneteenth for Black people is a sacred day. It is a sacred time, and we hope to add to that sanctity together. By making it clear that Black people will lead in forging the next world, a world where Black people not only survive, but we thrive. And we know that everyone is going to be doing that differently. And so we've created multiple opportunities for folks to lean in this weekend. We know that there are people in our communities that are still practicing social distancing and or are still quarantining. And so we'll have tangible ways for you to plug in from your homes. We also know that folks are riding the momentum and engaged in local fights. And so there's local organizations, Black-led organizations across the country that will be leading actions, marches, and protests in their own communities. And then for folks who are interested in raising their voice in a different collective way, we're calling on folks to meet us in DC. We will be centering our 3 days of action starting on Friday with these 3 core demands. Invest in Black communities, defund the police, and Trump must resign. So I want to be clear, we're not bad electoral mathematicians. We know what it means to have an egomaniac in the White House and our chances of him potentially resigning. But we do think there's a chance that Ivanka will walk up in that bunker that he's been held up in and say, come on, Dad, this is too much. It's time for us to roll. And so either way, we're making it clear that we will fight for him to be clear about what he has done to our communities, both this weekend and in November, if need be. I really appreciated the framing that Dr. Davis gave us about, I am voting for myself, I'm voting for my people. And so, yeah, the weekend will be framed around those days. We are very aware that we are still inside of a pandemic. We have a whole public health team that includes epidemiologists that have been tracking spikes following protests, that have been putting out information, including what to know before you go. If you have symptoms, baby, we love you. Stay that ass at home. So we have those very concrete directives. We'll have PPE for our folks. There will be places for folks to get tested for COVID on site. And so we know folks are in motion. We know folks are in the streets. What we're clear about is if we don't step forward with the transformative demands that we know are necessary in this moment, they will be swallowed up by the same reformist visions that have been detrimental to our ability to get to freedom. So that's all I'll say. I want to keep it short and cute. We're excited. The website is www. People don't say that no more. The whole www part. I'm old, y'all. I'm old. 619.com is where you can find us. You can list the action that's happening in your community. If you want to take the lead on an action, you can plug into one. You can also get information about the DC joint. And I would encourage you to go to our Instagram. It's like Movement for Black Lives, but like they don't use vowels. It's spelled weird, but I promise you'll be able to find it. There's a really, really beautiful video that is basically calling us into collective action that also has images from our comrades in South Africa. So yeah, I encourage y'all to check out both the website and our social media platforms. Grateful to be in service and in community with y'all. Black love.
Black love. Black love. Once again, thank you to Dr. Angela Davis, to Dr. Cherrell Brown, to Dr. Derecka Purnell, Esquire, to Dr. K, to Dr. Carissa, Dr. Delaney. I'm giving out doctorates all day. Because you know, what you all have given us is far more than those ivory towers have in a long time. And I greatly appreciate what you all have given us. I like to say always that as Black people, we have been dismembered, we have been discarded across continents, across waters, across this country, across the South. And every time we do this, we are in a process of remembering ourselves. We are remembering the different pieces of us that have been strewn about. And as we recompose ourselves, we build ourselves to be stronger with an historical consciousness and freedom dreams for the future. And so we want to thank you all, welcome you all back in 2 weeks for another Sunday school. We love you. Hope to see some of you all of you all in some street, if you can be, next weekend. DreamDefenders.org. As you all already heard, we're internationalists, Black feminists, anti-capitalist, socialists, and we want to be a home for all of you. So thank you all very much. Much love, and keep pushing. Aluda,
Thank
continue.
you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I said to Mr. Horn, I said, these cars might be following you, so don't worry about it. I said, they might be seriously following you, just don't worry about it. And he reaches out to see the fifth car and pulls out a brown paper bag with a gun in it. I feel very safe now. With this bomb in my head, let it tick tock. Bullets flying everywhere, I'm talking big shots. Can't be playing both sides, talking flip flop. Another hashtag, another pilot drop. Somebody witness this, somebody eyes watch. You ain't never seen